This is our PS How To webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about how to build customer trust and loyalty through personalization. And we're really excited to get started with you all today. So I introduced myself. I'm Jackie Walker. I am from Publicis Sapient. I'm based in Houston, Texas. I've been here for about 15 years. I'm part of our customer experience and innovation group. I sit in our retail vertical, but I have a lot of history working across our industries here, and really excited to engage today on this topic with my lovely co-host, Bruce. Bruce, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Jackie. Hi, I'm Bruce Richards. I am from Adobe. I lead industry strategy and marketing for consumer goods and retail. So that means I sit in the retail and consumer goods space. But like Jackie, I have a good deal of experience across industry. So and personalization is kind of our topic of the day. So we're excited about being able to discuss it with all of you. I'm based out of New York, been in New York my entire life. And yeah, so let's get started, Jackie. We have a lot to talk about today.
Awesome. So we're going to actually kick off while we get started with a little bit of a poll. Love to hear some brands that you recently had an amazing personalized experience with. I think one of the things that's really critical for us to keep in mind is that we're people, we're consumers, we're customers. And we all experience this every day, and those set the benchmarks for us. And it's a good reminder that our consumers are exactly the same way. Their experiences really set the bar. So we'll keep that poll running for a minute while we start talking. As I was saying, I think, what's really critical to keep in mind is that a customer's last great experience is what sets the bar for all of their next experiences. So you heard Bruce and I introduce ourselves. We obviously come from a retail CP background, a lot of consumer industries. But what's really critical to keep in mind, and I always remind my clients of this, is that retail sets a lot of bars that customers then take with them into every interaction they have, regardless of what industry they're sitting in. So whether they're in another retailer and they're looking at personalized recommendations and promotions, consumer goods and thinking about subscriptions, maybe healthcare or banking, right? They're looking for that personalized experience with someone who really understands them and what they need. And then even government, right? Like, how many of us have gone into a government service and felt like, how is it possible that these people really don't know me, right? So how do we actually create these experiences that customers can really relate to? And I think the key is, if one company can know me this well, why can't others? Right. And so that's a good backdrop for us. We'll come back later to talk about some of the great brands that you've had some excellent experiences with. But we'll get rolling. So today we're going to discuss kind of three key topics. I'll have these kind of placeholders to keep us along the way and keep us honest on timing. But first, we'll talk about the value of customer trust and loyalty. Why are we here? Why does this even matter? We'll talk about the role of personalization in building loyalty. Thinking about personalization versus loyalty program is, I think, really an important construct we'll talk about. And we'll talk about implementing some personalization strategies. And at the end, we'll leave about 15 minutes for Q&A. So please submit your questions either in the chat or using the Q&A function. And our events team will help us out when we get there. So just keep that in mind. Feel free to ask questions. All right. So this first section, we're going to talk about two key topics. One is the imperative, why does trust matter? And then we'll talk about the impact of consumer loyalty on revenue, right? There's always a customer side and a business side to every equation, so we'll make sure we're hitting both. So Bruce, I'm going to turn it to you to talk a little bit about the consumer imperative.
Yeah, it's interesting that, when we've been preparing for today, we've been talking about trust. And I think in consumers' minds, trust takes on different roles. It's, I trust you when I give you my information that you're going to not only keep it safe, but that you're going to use it in the right way and pay me back in some way by recognizing that you know me. I trust that you're going to do the right thing with it, both from a security perspective and a usage perspective. But what's interesting is, at Adobe, we've done a lot of research talking to consumers about, their engagement with brands and their loyalty with brands and the trust that comes along with that. And what's really interesting is over 3/4 of the consumers that we spoke to a little over a year ago, said they're really frustrated with brands that don't deliver personalized experiences. And to me, that translates into an opportunity for them to walk away, right? If they don't trust that you're going to get this right and deliver personalization, everything that I want is pretty much a click away. And let's come back to what you talked about a minute ago with, all of the different industries and the way that they personalize. In a consumer's mind, this verticalization or this vertical world in which we all live, but in what we do every day for a living and how consumers live their lives, they're very different. So we verticalize because it's easier for us, and the audience here, they verticalize because that's their role. In a consumer's mind, they don't verticalize. They expect, a great experience is going to translate from one industry to the other. So when they get one and it works out great for them, and then they don't get one from another industry, I think the quote was, if one brand can know me this well, why can't another? That really makes them question their trust and their loyalty to that brand. So when we dug deeper into this whole concept of consumers being frustrated with the lack of personalization, we asked them, well, if you don't get it, what makes you walk away? And how easy is it for a brand to lose you? And we were talking to brand loyalists, people who said, I've been loyal to this brand, but I left them because I had a bad experience. And that bad experience was directly related to lack of personalization. So look at the number. 57% of consumers walked away from a brand that they previously said they were loyal to. So the big picture here is loyalty is really at a risk. And the really scary thing is three strikes you're out is no longer the rule. Consumers are walking away from brands after 2.4 bad experiences. Now, bear in mind, this research was retail, consumer goods, and travel and hospitality. But because consumers don't delineate between verticals, this applies across pretty much every industry. So 2.4 bad experiences, they're walking away. The scarier number is it takes 6.5 good experiences to earn their loyalty back. So there's sort of this really weird cycle that happens, because if you lose them and you're trying to win them back and you're building up that scale towards 6.5 good experiences and you mess up, you're back down starting from scratch. So there's like this really weird cycle that starts to happen that makes it really hard to get consumers back to your brand. And again, a click away, there's something else happening, so another brand that they can try. And if that brand gets it right, you've lost them for good.
And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind is the choice that customers have, right? Like we don't have to go to one provider. I think some industries can get a little comfortable when consumers are too reliant on them when they don't
Yes.
have choice. But I do like to remind that, like from a customer perspective, being stuck with you is not really a great reason.
Yeah,
It doesn't make me want to come to you.
right. And no, a lot of us don't want to talk about COVID anymore. But interestingly, COVID is what sort of drove this whole personalization phenomenon, right? It's, people didn't have a choice but to go digital. And as soon as you went digital, you saw this world open up of opportunity and choice. And that really, permeated every single industry that we've been talking about.
I love that point. And I think, Amazon is a great example of this, maybe like the ultimate of personalization and got there much faster than a lot of the industry. But it was that digitization of the experience that really pushed it. And I think what's important about this quote, we all recognize this guy, right? If there's one reason we've done better than our peers, it's because we focused on our consumers. And so it really does encapsulate that idea of the mutual value, which I think is really, really critical, right? And I think we always have to remind ourselves sometimes we can get very focused from the business perspective. What do we need customers to do? And what we don't think enough about is like, what are we going to do to make them do the thing that we want them to do, right? How do we add the value to them? So that's an
Exactly.
important thing to keep in mind. One of the ways we think about this is just like the idea of the retail funnel and flipping the funnel. So when you think about the traditional funnel, it doesn't really think about customer experience at scale, right? The old-fashioned way is I will acquire a customer, right? I'm going to do outreach marketing, top of funnel marketing. I'm going to bring a customer in. Amazing. Now I'm going to get them to buy something, right? And I want to do that as quickly as I possibly can. Now, once they buy something, then I'm going to worry about retaining them. And sometimes it's almost like a churn prevention is almost the way that you think about that, right? Like they have been inactive for too long. I think I need to like reach out to them and try to pull them back in. Then we get into referral, right? Did we get the customer to actually care enough to want to refer their friends and family? Important way that we grow, of course. And then the revenue will follow, right? And so it's very much focused on this top of the funnel. Bruce and I were chatting before we joined. Bruce, what was your stat? You had a great stat.
It's interesting because when we started working on this, I got excited when I saw this slide because I was like, yes, that's the key to this. It's because retention is so much less expensive than acquisition. Acquiring a new customer is 5 to 7 times more expensive than retaining one. So why wouldn't you want to spend your money in a focused way to retain the people that you have? And we're not saying don't acquire, but you've got to shift the focus a little bit. And that's what I loved about this. It really turned the funnel on its head. So, and the other stat that I had is, customer retention or increasing customer retention by 5% can boost profits by 25 to 95% depending on the industry. Those are huge
Amazing.
numbers. So
It is.
retaining your customers and not letting them go to that click away is really going to turn into dollars for your organization.
Absolutely. And I think when we talk about too, later we'll talk about the different data and signals that you're getting about a customer. You mentioned, Bruce, the idea like once you give a customer a bad experience, you're starting from scratch. When you
Right.
think about the foundation of data and knowledge you need to have about a customer, if you're constantly bringing new customers into the ecosystem, you're starting from scratch with these customers every single
Yep.
time. So I think and I'm an experienced person, right? So this is near and dear to my heart. Giving a good experience, it is about flipping that funnel and thinking about retention first. What is that compelling value proposition? What's the compelling experience that I'm going to give my customer that is going to make them want to come back to me? And when we focus on how do we retain a customer, how do we keep a customer happy through sustained engagement with the brand, and focus on activation through that lens, it really changes the picture, right? It's not just about changing the funnel, but it's really about changing the way that you think about how you relate to your customer and the way that you organize. And we'll talk about that a little bit at the end as well. So I think this is a good kind of thing to keep in the back of our minds is sometimes, even the traditional ways that we thought about this as marketers can hold us back from thinking about what we need to do to actually have sustained growth over time.
Yep. Agreed.
All right. This is my favorite one-liner, guys. So I'm going to get
Yep.
it out of the way at the beginning. Loyalty is not a program. Loyalty is an outcome. That is the most important thing I think Bruce or I will say this entire hour. So let it marinate. I think sometimes we say, a brand really wants to work on loyalty. So what they're talking about is what's the program, what's the construct I put in place that is going to create that sticky relationship. And the reality is, I think we have to actually think about like the actual English word loyalty. What does that word mean? To be loyal to someone, to have a affinity for, to have love for. And when we think about building brand love, it's not an earn a burn loyalty program, right? It really is about creating that sustained engagement over time, those 6.5 good experiences that are
Right.
actually going to make a customer care and love us.
Right, because a
Um,
program a program is just not going to drive brand loyalty, and because not every industry has programs, I mean, retailers historically have had the best loyalty programs across industries, airlines and travel and hospitality as well. Other industries just don't because of the nature of their business. So what we're trying to do is create this understanding that an organization has to get behind loyalty as a brand concept, not about implementing a program.
100%. And I think it can get a little bit confusing for brands sometimes, honestly, because we do see stats about customer loyalty. What is the benefit of having loyal customers? There are revenue growth implications of that, 12 to 18% incremental growth per year from loyalty program members versus non-members, right? It's very easy to get confused in that construct. 70%, 72% of loyalty members say they shop more. So there's some like side effect going on, but I think it's a correlation more than causation in a lot of cases. Because we see see on the flip side that a lot of loyalty programs actually fail. 77% of rewards-based programs actually fail in 2 years to deliver on the original objectives. Loyalty programs are also expensive, right? There's a fellow that works here at Sapient that says we shouldn't pay customers to be our friends, right? You might give them a coupon to sign up in the beginning, but if we are consistently paying our customers to actually be our friends, then we're not doing it right. We need to get out of those models. And those like redemption rates and all of those things are a part of that equation. I think one of the important things to keep in mind, and this goes back, and I'll say it again and again, is the human side of this, right? We are people at the end of the day. Every consumer is a human, at least in our industry construct for now, right? But I think the biggest problem is that emotional nature, right? 70% of purchases are emotional. They're not based on, how many loyalty points am I going to get back if I buy this item from this brand versus the other. It really is, like much of what we purchase is actually that instinctive, I want this now, I need this. I see something that is from a brand I love, which catches my attention and maybe makes me have an unintended purchase. And our brains work faster, right? The process that it takes when you think about like comparison shopping for something and looking at all my options, how much energy it takes versus I see it, I love it, I want it, I buy it, right? It's much faster. So I think getting to that emotional piece of the puzzle is really, really key.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
think the other thing just to add to that, Jackie, is, you know, think about industries that don't necessarily have loyalty program capabilities, right? So retailers, we talked about that. They're almost a staple to every retail business. But the business models in consumer goods don't necessarily
Great point.
allow for that, so it becomes a very different scenario in how, say, a consumer goods or a CPG brand defines the quest for brand loyalty. So if you just think about a large house of brands that owns a diaper brand and a toilet paper brand, right? A diaper brand gives that house of brands or that diaper brand the opportunity to build consumer loyalty because there's an emotional connection that new moms and dads can make with that diaper brand. It's like, but loyalty becomes more about a program than, an engagement with them and giving them information and knowledge that they need as new parents starting out in this world that's totally unknown to them. Versus a toilet paper brand in that same house of brands, it's really difficult to stay loyal to, you're not necessarily going to develop a lifetime relationship with a toilet paper purchaser. So it's a very different model. And I think that sort of comes back to the whole concept that we were talking about earlier. It's about what do you need to do to build brand loyalty and keep consumers coming back to your brand, regardless of how they're engaging. So if you don't own the transaction, it takes on a different life, where a retailer or an airline or a hotel where they own the transaction, that takes on a different life.
I love that. That's a great point. And that's an awesome segue to the next kind of section of content that we'll talk about, which is really like, what is the role of personalization? What does it mean for customers? And then how do we think about how we actually start to execute on some of this? So I'll let you talk about this, Bruce, like the move from
Yeah,
personalization to at scale. What is that all
yeah.
about?
It seems like a small thing, but it's really not. It's actually an enormous thing, right? And so at Adobe, we're talking to a lot of customers, and sort of the first question we ask them in our discovery is, "What do your personalization initiatives look like?" And they say, "Well, we're really good at it." And we dig deeper, and we want to learn more. And it turns out that most of their personalization initiatives are focused on one channel, and almost all the time that channel is email, right? We're really good at personalizing our emails, and that's excellent. They're delivering right here on the slide, a tailored, relevant experience to the right customer on the right channel. So they're personalizing and they're good at it. What we're trying to do is move them to achieve this bigger idea of loyalty to a personalization at scale mindset. And that's about the ability to do that relevant experience with the right customer, right channel, to do it for every customer on every channel in real time. I mean, if you think about it, you talked about brand exploration, Jackie, right? If you want to do, comparisons between brands, how many channels do you engage in order to do that? And how many times do you take that from the physical to digital environment and vice versa, right? So brands need to be able to recognize the fact that a consumer can probably be engaging with you on a minimum of 3 to 5 channels on a regular basis just to find more information about your brand. So the ability to recognize that and then deliver relevance is what personalization at scale is all about.
And I love that point because it really is about understanding the customer journey at the end of the day, right? How do our customers actually engage with us? How do consumers engage with our brand? And understanding that journey that they take between channels. And I think an important thing to keep in mind, and again, we've experienced this as people, right? Like you think about when you have an issue with your telco, I'll pick on our telco friends, right? And you call and it seems like they have no idea who you are. They have no idea what your issue is. You spend 15 minutes explaining it to someone, you get sent to the next level of escalation, and then they have no idea who you are. So I think that is a frustrating experience. We can all relate to that. And sometimes thinking about when things go wrong is actually easier than thinking about when things go right in terms of how this should all work. But when we think about what personalization at scale means, it really does mean thinking about it from the customer perspective. What are the different ways that they're going to interact with the brand over time when things are going right, when things are going wrong? And how do we make sure that we make them feel known at all of the points of that? So if they start a transaction online and then they show up in a store, is there a way that we can actually connect the dots for them in a high consideration purchase? How do we make sure that we're doing the right follow-up? Really simple things, right? Asking for referrals, asking for feedback, making sure that we understand those interaction loops across channels so that we can meet them when they're coming to meet us. I think a really critical piece of this.
Yeah, and I think this visual, Jackie, really highlights the point that there is absolutely no linearity in the journey, right? It's all over the place. In fact, there was sort of a curvy, interrupted, not interrupted, but very curvy line that goes in a million different places up and down. But I would argue that, that line almost intersects and crosses over in a million different ways too. And just from we're talking about it as experienced professionals, right? But if we just think about from a consumer perspective, what we all went through in the past week, right? We had Black Friday, we had Cyber Monday. How many different devices did you pick up to start that shopping and do product exploration? And should I wait till Monday? And and if all of the questions that you ask yourself that lead you to a different place in your journey. So just put yourself in that mindset, and I think that you can really say, yeah, I get it. This is kind of what my journey looks like.
Yep. I saw someone post that yesterday was finally Leave Me Alone Wednesday.
Yes. Yes. See, and someone who and a brand that says we're going to leave you alone today is personalizing that message because they know how inundated you've been. But
Exactly. So
yeah.
talk about the payoff, Bruce.
Yeah, this is kind of cool. So, Jackie and I can kind of talk till we're blue in the face about this, and you could say these two are either, on point or they're full of it. But the bottom line is that, we interact with a lot of professionals in this space in an effort to quantify what personalization at scale means to brands who do it. And brands that are investing are really seeing enormous benefits. I mean, you can look at those numbers around this really happy guy, assuming I always like to say he's the marketer, right? He's really happy about his personalization efforts, but it's revenue growth, it's ROI, it's customer sat lift, reduction in marketing and sales costs, decrease in cost to service customers. I mean, what marketing professional wouldn't want to go to their boss and say, if we do this, I can save you 10 to 20% in your marketing and sales costs? And that's going to raise some eyebrows and get some attention in the organization. So working with our partners at McKinsey and Forrester and Boston Consulting Group, we've been able to quantify a lot of the value behind personalization for brands. And if they're doing it right, it's there. That the dollars, don't leave dollars on the table by not doing it.
Yeah. And what I love about it, and a lot of initiatives that are actually good for customers, sometimes we think if we're going to provide a better customer experience, it's going to have to cost us money, right? Like
Yes.
that's the trade-off we think about.
Mhm.
And I think now when we're doing it right, not only are we going to see top line benefit, but we're also going to see bottom line savings and efficiency. So
Of
incredibly powerful.
Of course, and this plays directly back to that flip the funnel chart that you were talking about. So if you're saving money on those acquisition costs, and again, we're not saying stop focusing on acquisition. I want to be really clear about that. But if we flip that chart and we really put a lot of focus on retention, what you're able to do is you get to that one-to-one personalization place. You're saving money in doing that, and then you can reinvest those funds in other places, and some of that can be in acquisition. So or in other parts of the business. So there's, the numbers that are on this slide are great, but they're only a snapshot. There are far more that go along with these.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we're going to start talking about how we do this. Like, how do you actually start to deliver on it? Because some of it sounds pretty hard. Like, it is daunting. Let's be realistic, right? We understand that. So I think there are, three key pillars that we really think about to be able to deliver this at scale. The first is content, right? So we need more content to be able to deliver these experiences. It's worth noting, this has always been the thing that's held us back, right? We talk about wanting to provide these great personalized experiences. Then we realize how many different versions of content we would need. And then everybody goes home. You need a nap.
Yeah.
But what's happening now is we're getting to a place with AI, with Gen AI, where this is going to be much more economically feasible and practical, and we'll have the tools to be able to activate against this. So thinking about that whole content supply chain funnel, really, really a critical piece of this.
Just to stay on content for a minute, Jackie. A couple of stats that might surprise some of our audience. In retail and consumer goods, the content demands over the last over 2022 and 23 doubled. Okay, just by the end of 2023, people were saying my content demands have doubled. By the end of this year, those industries are forecasting a 5x multiplier on that doubling. Okay, that is overwhelming for any industry, even if they don't hit the 5x point. They're still trying to deal with the doubling at the end of 2023, and now they're looking at a 5x multiplier. That's absolutely incredible. And finding a way to manage all of that demand is where AI and Gen AI comes in. That's what you were talking about. It's really kind of incredible to see that happen and figuring out how brands are reacting. So the numbers are huge. I'll let you go on to the next pillar.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And it's worth noting too, and obviously I'm talking to someone from Adobe, right? So it's worth mentioning. When we think about the content, there's the content production side of it, right? Like, how are we possibly going to create this much content? But then once you make it, how do you store it? How do you track it? How do you tag it so that it's able to be used? Incredible, important part of the puzzle as well.
Yeah, that could be our next webinar, Jackie. I've got a whole ton of content on, how to create a great content supply chain, and the pieces of the puzzle are listed there. It's really not just about how to create the content, but how do you move it through a supply chain? If you think about a traditional supply chain mindset around, how do we get product to the right place at the right time? This is how do we get content to the right time, in the right place at the right time.
Absolutely. And I think, that is part of this whole kind of this pillar approach, right? So you have the content. Now I have the data and insights that I can use to activate it. And so we've talked about CDP for many, many years, customer data platforms. I think some brands actually, took a big step to go far with CDP without understanding how they were going to activate it, right? And so we made some initial data investments, maybe haven't seen them pay off the way that we needed them to, and can feel a little bit discouraged. But I think the pull through of this is really thinking about the omni-channel journeys and how do you activate with content. So using that data we have about our customers, we'll talk about segmentation more in a minute, but all of this measurement, all the data, all the signals that we have, and then really activating them through the omni-channel journey. And that's a key piece of it.
Yep. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to have, the knowledge about a consumer down to a micro segmentation level, and then say, well, we don't have the content to deliver to him or her. That's a huge miss. So the coming together of these three pillars, there's a criticality to that. It's not about looking at one versus the other. It's about looking at them as a whole, but the pillars help sort of organize the thought process, the things that a brand would need to look at in order to get this right.
Absolutely. And it's worth noting some of the brands that you all mentioned at the poll in the beginning, Netflix, Chewy, Target, Delta. These are all brands that really excel at this, right?
Yep.
Um, I like to talk about the role of data-driven experience. What does that mean, right? How does that change things? You think about Netflix. What is Netflix great at? Netflix has a lot of content, but what's magical about Netflix is not the fact that they have a lot of content. What's magical about Netflix is, sorry, all the other platforms, but Netflix is way better at finding me the things I actually want to watch,
Mhm.
right? And making it super easy to consume. And so, like the content is a part of it, but the activation of the data over time is what makes it addictive. That's what they figured out how to do that's masterful, is actually that matchmaking between a viewer and the content.
Absolutely. I think Netflix is getting a little scary because they think they know that I fall asleep after 4 episodes because then the message comes up, "Are you still watching?"
The
So
worst part, I have two kids, and my husband always gets mad because they totally blow the algorithms.
it's great.
All right. We're gonna do another poll, so you guys can think about this, talk about this while we move on. So we talked about the three pillars. We talked about data and insights. We talked about content and content supply chain. We talked about orchestrated journeys. Would love to hear from you all. Where do you think your team is going to focus most on in 2025? Obviously, the idea, and we'll talk about operating model in a few minutes, is how do you bring these together and connect them? But just think about it. Where do you think you're going to focus most this year? Okay, you can tell this is live because my cat turned on my robot vacuum, which is driving me crazy. So I may have to jump up and turn it off. So we know this is a live recording. All right. You weren't getting out of here without an eye chart. Let's be honest. You're
Yeah.
talking to Sapient and Adobe here. Bruce, can you talk a little bit about this while I go get my vacuum?
Yeah, I certainly can. Yeah, this was really meant to just sort of illustrate when we talked about the three pillars and the data and insights, the content and the journeys. This is how this all, you know, operationally comes to life, right? It's about ingesting the data and unifying it, that unified customer profile in real time so that you can activate it across all of those channels. So this is how taking the three pillars of data and insights, content and creation, and the journey, and what it looks like going from end to end. So starting with all the places in which the consumer interacts with you on the left, you capture and unify that data. You create a real-time profile around that customer. You use that to create segments and micro segments so that you can get down to what that one-on-one profile looks like, and then you activate across all of the different channels. So we talked about how the journeys aren't linear. Look at all the places that a consumer can be at any given point in time, and you want to be able to have the right information to speak to them with relevance and context in that activation channel. And then, of course, how do you effectively measure to know what's working? And what's interesting is we're seeing sort of this shift from just measuring a campaign or a channel to what we're calling unified measurement, and brands that are really doing this well are overlaying the customer component on their traditional measurement activities. So instead of saying this campaign did well, you're able to say this campaign did well with Bruce, or it did well with Jackie, or it didn't do well with one of them, and here's why. And then also get down to the content element of those campaigns and say Jackie reacted to this content, Bruce reacted to this, and here's how you measure it so that you can go back to the beginning, start the capture piece again, and then move it through the channel, but then adjust accordingly to make sure that based on Jackie and Bruce's responses to what you put in front of them, you're adjusting. So then you're creating this really great test and learn environment where it's all data based.
I love that. And I think one of the things that's really worth mentioning is some of this can get kind of creepy sounding, right? And
Yeah.
and customers do get a little freaked out.
Mhm.
So as we think about how we build these customer profiles, it really is, we need to be thoughtful about how we do it. We need to think about the combination of, first party data, and like that's a whole other webinar talking about the importance of first party data.
Right.
There's the third party data that we need to bring in, and we think about different technologies to make it effective to do that, like clean rooms and other parts of our tech stack to be able to handle that. but then also zero party data, right? What can we get a customer to tell us about themselves willingly? What preferences, whether they're implicit or hopefully explicit, so we can understand those signals better. And then data privacy underlies all of this, right? So when we talk about why are we here, we're talking about trust and loyalty.
Yeah.
The trust part of the equation is really making sure that we are collecting data in an ethical way, obviously, but we're also activating it in a way that makes sense for customers, right? They can see the benefit. I told you this thing about myself, and now you're actually making my experience better. So it
Right.
could be things as easy as I told you I'm a size 8. And now you're showing me models that are my size, right? Versus guessing. Don't guess. That's a bad idea, right? But how do we make the experience better and actually play that out in the experience? Really critical.
And that you're protecting my data long term so that no one else can, violate my privacy and use it in ways that I don't consent to.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to talk about segmentation for 1 second. I think this is really important. So, we used to say personalization, and what we really meant was segmentation, right? Like, you have to, how much content does it take to do this effectively? Now we talk about segmentation in a little bit of a different way. And I think it is really important to remember that even though we're talking about personalization, segmentation and micro-segmentation are really important steps of the journey, and we want to be thoughtful about how we do it. Segments help us get an understanding. We'll talk about experimentation in 1 second, but it is about hypotheses, right? How do we as marketers get better at having guesses about what's going to resonate with our customers? So when we look at segmentation, and I see 60% of you responded that you're looking at orchestrated journeys next year. So this is a great analog to that, right? When you think about the segmentation, I understand my customer needs. I understand the moments that matter to them. I can start to understand where are the journey, are my pains and gains, where do I have those opportunities? I can start to predict actions, which is a really key piece of this, right? If I only understand what a customer did in the past and I don't understand where they're going in the future, it can be really easy to feel like, you're the banner ad that's chasing somebody around the internet for days and weeks after they make a purchase already. And why didn't you know that they bought it? And do that all across the enterprise. And then finally, it lets you design and activate these personalized experiences accordingly, right? So the segments are actually an important window of understanding so that we can make guesses about how we're going to activate customers in ways that are going to be effective. We are getting more sophisticated in how we do that. So thinking about not only how we segment from like I understand data and now I have a thing that I can use, but also machine learning to dynamically adjust these segments over time. And really quick, because we want to talk about how we activate all this and we want to give you time for questions as well. Experimentation is a key part of this. So making sure that we're actually setting the foundation early and thinking about from the beginning, how are we going to do experimentation? How do we make sure that we have the right measurement strategy, the right tagging, the right reporting structure to be able to do this, to be able to optimize over time, test hypotheses, learn, scale things that work, get rid of things that don't work really quickly. Really, really key piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think when we talk about tagging too, I mean, I think that, some just an important call out there is making sure that when it comes to tagging, you're being very careful about getting that right. Because when we talk about trust, the wrong tagging methodology could completely mess up the comms that are going out to a particular customer. And that's going to come back to their opportunity to walk away from you. So you want to make sure that your tagging capabilities are as buttoned up as possible.
Love that. And I think data rich, insights poor is a quote for a reason, right? So making sure that we're really thinking about the insights that we're going to get from the data.
Yep.
Right. So we talked about customer trust and loyalty. What is it? We talked about personalization. This is not a loyalty program. This is actually about creating a range of experiences that resonate for customers that are going to drive business value. Now let's talk about some strategies. So we'll take this in two ways. One is like, what are some quick wins? Because we're all looking for quick wins in 2025, regardless which industry you're sitting in. And then we'll talk about, more long-term planning, long-term view. And again, reminder, we'll have some time for Q&A, I promise. So please submit those questions so we can make sure we get to them. All right, Bruce, what can we do to quick win? How are
Yeah,
we
I mean,
doing?
a lot of this may seem kind of basic, but there are things that a lot of folks aren't doing, or they're just not thinking about in their mix from a data perspective. It's really about leveraging existing customer data. We talked about retention. So what are you doing with the data that you already have in order to better communicate with those customers? And that's, the basics are you using purchase and interaction history to recommend similar products and services. I mean, the whole idea of curating things based on what you know about your customers. Jackie already talked about the importance of segmentation. You can't speak to everybody with a broad message. You've got to be able to segment and micro segment in order to start a more robust personalization initiative. Behavioral triggers, tapping into real-time data. We talked about those journeys, and it's not just about coming back a few days after a transaction to react to what the consumer is doing. It's like, what are they doing in real time? Are they coming back to check for, price reductions? We just talked about the last few days, and how do you react to that? And then, hey, we just saw that you came back, how can we help? Or you present a customized offer, based on what they bought and the fact that they're coming back. Finding out how they interact with you on certain channels. Maybe sometimes they're using the same channel all the time to purchase, but they're using a lot of different channels in order to research. And this one's really important, asking for feedback and preferences. This makes a consumer feel very seen and known, and then using that feedback and preference data in order to give them more personalization initiatives. So it's turning it right back around and saying, hey, we heard you, and here's how we're going to react to you. And then on the right side of the list, it's all about experience. How do you make their onboarding with your brand more exciting and more personal? It's not just like close the transaction and walk away. It's like, hey, did we do the right thing? How else can we make this experience great for you? What else can we do for you? Tailoring search and navigation. If you see them going to places on your site, make sure that you're reacting to that, so your on-site personalization is more exciting and dynamic, so the consumer can really get engaged with that. We talked about loyalty and VIP perks. If they exist, highlight them, or maybe give them like a bar on their interaction page with you, so they can see where they sit with you. Every time I go into my Marriott or Delta or other, my other apps, I get to see exactly where I stand. I'm quite frankly not happy that I'm not hitting my Delta number this year. So, like
Get on the road, Bruce.
but Marriott, I hit months ago. So, but those things are important to consumers. They want to see where they stand. Dynamic content on all platforms, keeping things fresh and exciting based on what you know about them. Social media, what's their interaction with you, and using social as a proof point to the value that the product brings to the consumer, and then really making repeat purchases simple. Can you provide them with a subscription capability, a renewal capability? I mean, back to my days when I worked in retail marketing, I learned that, mascaras only last 3 months, and women wanted to be reminded to replenish their mascara. That's a great, thing for beauty manufacturers to be doing is, hey, you should be replenishing that because it's not good anymore. So things like that are going to make a big difference. And these are quick wins. They're easy to implement.
I love that. And it's important because I think sometimes it can be very daunting to think about the long range, right? We talked earlier about brands who maybe invested very quickly in CDP, really like believed what that would enable, but
Yep.
didn't think enough about the pull through and activation, and then have become frustrated and a little bit disillusioned or jaded with it, right?
Exactly.
So we need to think about how we use the things we have and how do we start to get some momentum, but also think about the longer range. And we're going to wrap up in a minute here, so you have time for questions. But I think, as you think about this flow, again, I'm experienced strategy, so this will come as no surprise, but defining the strategy and the customer value proposition is the first thing, right? Like if we can't understand how we're delivering value to our customers and why they're going to come back, we have a challenge. So we need to think about what is that strategy and how are we going to maximize benefits. Then we think about experiences. How is this going to play out in the experiences that we have? What are the segments? What are the journeys that we should prioritize? We're not going to do everything everywhere all at the same time. We all know that. We have to think about speed to value. What are the highest impact places that we can start to show quick wins? Then we think about, okay, this is the experience I want to deliver. What data do I need to have to be able to enable that? What tagging is missing? Where am I not putting data in the right places? How am I positioning or not positioning well to be able to activate? And then finally, we get to capabilities, right? We understand what we want to enable, we understand the data that we need, and then we understand what technical gaps may be required to actually activate that. And those could be things like, experience platforms, MarTech stack improvements, frequently an issue,
Mm.
like improving upon the CDP as it's implemented today. It could be increasingly the ad tech stack, right? So I think that's another key piece, is thinking about, as we are trying to expand the impact of our data, our customer data, how do we monetize it effectively, and how do we link that in meaningful ways? And then how do we get ready to experiment and make sure we have the right tools to actually enable that? So really critical. And then our last point, Bruce,
Yeah.
it's not just about the
So
tech, it's about the people, right?
of course. Yeah, well, it's interesting, Jackie, because the four pillars that you just outlined play right into this because um, built into all of those pillars is the opportunity for silos to prevent progress, right? I mean, everything across the board from the strategy to the technology. If an organization is siloed in a way where there's not a complete cultural shift towards personalization across the organization, those are opportunities for failure. So this is sort of a snapshot of where we're seeing leading brands being successful. They're organizing for success. And this is not, guys, this is not meant to be a Bible. It's meant to be best practices, things that we're seeing in the marketplace. And two things that we want to highlight are brands that are successful in implementing personalization initiatives are doing two things. They're doing a personalization COE, or a center of excellence, and they're also implementing what we call agile marketing squads. And these are not mutually exclusive. Most of the brands that we're seeing are doing this, side by side. So the COE is where it becomes a very senior level mandate for buy-in, and that helps break down some of those silos that exist in the chart that Jackie showed earlier, right? So you have a dedicated team. It's a mix of business and IT. That's critical. It has to be a mix, and there has to be C-level sponsorship and a steering committee, and those people should come from the business and IT, the C-level, basically a demonstrative coming together of our two worlds are now blended and we're committed to personalization. And the roles are, very high level. What's the strategy? Jackie's first call out. Prioritize the use cases, put them on a roadmap. What business processes and org requirements exist to do this? What's broken? What needs to be fixed? How do you source the right solutions, both from a technology and perhaps agency perspective, if that plays into the mix? And they have to really be the drivers of implementation and adoption in the organization. There's no negotiation here. This is what we're doing. We're moving down this road. And they have to really leverage subject matter experts across the business as needed. There's typically a 10 to 20% dedication of time in the COE towards personalization. And then on the Agile Marketing Squad side, these are cross-functional pods, and they have dedicated full-time employees that are organized around pools of value. So those pools of value, depending on the size of the organization, could be 3. It could be 20. We've seen brands that organize around demographics. They have a pool of value around millennials, around boomers, and around Gen Zers, like things like that. But what they're doing is they're taking what's happening on the left-hand side, the business cases and the strategy, and they're defining the tactics that align to that, and what ideas come up through developing those tactics, the capabilities needed to activate those use cases that have been previously defined. And they're creating this really great test and measure environment so they can really implement at scale and move with agility. But the coolest part about this is they become a community. And so they're not operating in a siloed environment. They're operating around a pool of value, but they're constantly sharing out with other marketing squads where their successes are, where their failures are, and how do they all implement best practices. So again, this isn't meant to be the be all end all, but this is a snapshot of where we're seeing brands successful.
I love it. And I think one thing that's really important to think about is how you move from where we started at the beginning, loyalty as a program,
Yeah.
to loyalty as an objective, which is then realized and rationalized in the organizational
Mhm.
culture, right? It's
Yep.
actually a huge shift to move from, I have a team that is my loyalty program team,
Yeah.
to I now have a cross-functional team that is worried about actually creating connection with customer.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, roles almost define your mindset. Like they'll say, well, I'm in IT and I do this. How am I responsible for personalization? Isn't that a marketing function? No, if the entire organization is committed to personalization at scale, there has to be an understanding created in every role in the org about how they contribute to it, right? And it's like you're part of a very big puzzle. And that nice segue to your chart here.
It is a puzzle.
Yep.
And all of these things do fit together. Ultimately, thinking about, we talked about the three pillars, it all lines up, right? It's about the experiences we deliver, the data that we capture and activate in a cycle, the technology stack that enables it all, and then the operating model that brings it to life. And that concludes our content. We have about 10 minutes left for Q&A. So happy to answer any questions from the audience.
Okay. What am I seeing first? I see Paul. What do you think the biggest challenges that brands have in implementing these solutions? Paul, I think I just sort of covered that. I think it's silos and a lack of commitment across the entire enterprise. When you get everybody on board, suddenly there's this complete shift in how people think about it, and those knows we can't do that because become, let me think about how we can do that because it makes sense for our brand and for our customers.
I think another key piece is how do you make it digestible, right? So sometimes we think about building capabilities as like a broad horizontal capability. I'm going to pick on CDP again. Sorry, our lovers of CDP. But, I'm going to invest a whole lot of time, a whole lot of energy, a whole lot of budget to activate this capability. And it's going to take a long time before I can realize any value. I think we all know that's really hard, right? And very discouraging and very daunting. So I think one of the shifts that we're seeing, and we're seeing a lot of success with it, is, brands thinking about what's the vertical slice of capability that I need to activate a use case and show value. It is about speed to value. It's about being nimble, and it's about those slices of capabilities that are actually going to deliver something that we can all rally around and say we had a win. Versus thinking about, these big 2-year multi-million-dollar programs that we have to do this first before we can do anything and get value. So I think that's a big challenge, and that's a shift that we're seeing, partly by necessity, but partly because of just maturity and understanding how we're going to get things done over time.
Agreed.
All right, the next question. What are the key factors to consider when developing dynamic customer segmentation models? I'll take the first stab at this one. So I think what's really interesting is there's some very old-fashioned ways to do customer segmentation, which can feel very like Jackie lives in Texas, urban Texas, has 2 children, is in the age bracket that she is in, like all of those kind of, it feels like a person, and it's very set and can feel a little bit inflexible. I think what we're seeing now, and a lot of the work that we do with our clients, is actually looking at the data and letting the data tell us the story about who our customers are, right? And so a lot of times we'll actually pair like management consultants and customer experience people together to look at what are the patterns that we can understand from our data. And then how do we make sense of that, right? How do we then apply the kind of human element to who these people are, what they care about, and making sure that we have actionable personas and profiles that can help push us forward when we start to think about activation. So I think that's a key part. Bruce, anything you want to add?
No, I agree. It's I nothing to add. I mean, you covered it all. It's a great point. I'm sorry, I'm reading other questions coming in too. I'm sorry. You mentioned proper tagging techniques. This may be a loaded question, but have you seen evidence of auto categorization working for brands on their content beyond, say, topic tags? That is
This
a
one
loaded
has
question.
your name written all over it, Bruce.
Yeah, that is a loaded question. Yes, we have seen that work and working, and it's growing. Look, Adobe has been at the forefront of the technology around tagging based on AI and ML. It's embedded into all of our solutions. So I think it warrants a deeper follow-up with you, though, Melinda. So I'm happy to take that information and get you a pretty robust answer to your question offline.
I think one thing we think a lot about is just the relationship between humans and machines, right?
Yeah.
So I think in general, sometimes there can be so much excitement about AI solutions that it becomes
Mhm.
a magic button, right? Like I will press the AI button and everything will magically appear.
Yep.
I think what is really important, and this goes to the operating model question in a way too, right, is thinking about what's the right relationship between the people in our teams and the capabilities and skills that we need to have, and then how they use AI to be able to work faster, to work better, to work smarter, to work at a much greater scale. So I think that relationship between the human and the AI is really important. Having good content strategy is
Mhm.
really important. Again, it always goes back to like, let's think about the strategy. Let's understand what we're trying to accomplish before we try to accomplish it. And actually, that connects as well to the customer segmentation question we were just talking about. Increasingly, like AI is used to do
Of
segmentation,
course. Yeah.
but it's really thinking about how do you create that relationship between the AI tools and the people who can understand and activate against it.
Right. And to Melinda's question about auto categorization, when you're tagging, there has to be a trust in the AI and ML solutions that you're using, so that it comes back to what I said earlier. It's like if you get that wrong, you're giving them an opportunity to walk away. So constantly testing and making sure that the algorithms that are being used in an AutoCAD environment are correct and providing the right level of solutions. If something doesn't look right, that's when the human has to come in and question it and say, something maybe remiss here. How do we assess what's going on? But yes, we've seen it work, but nothing's foolproof, and humans have to provide that layer of oversight to AI and ML.
All right, we're almost up on time. Any last questions? I had a pretty QA slide and I forgot to flash it up. How do we measure the incremental lift based on personalization? This is a great question. I think measurement, and we talked a lot about measurement through this whole hour, is really a key piece of this.
Mhm.
So I think the idea of incrementality is important because we need to understand what we're measuring, how we measure, and how we put the right benchmarks in place.
Mhm.
I think sometimes I've worked with customers that start with a number that's like AOV. Like that's all I care about is average order value. At the end of the day, that's all I care about. And so it's all I'm measuring. Um, as you work down the funnel with some of these personalization tactics, it gets harder and harder to attribute all the way to AOV. So one of the things that I would definitely think about when you're thinking about how to measure the lift based on personalization is not necessarily thinking about the metric at the very end of the story, but what are the metrics along the way that can give us hints that things are working. So that strategy around how we measure is actually a really, really critical piece of this.
Yeah, I agree, Jackie. I think that you know, measuring lift obviously is, there's a defined there's a definition of incremental lift, but I think you're making a really good point is what are the contributing factors to that lift? So, we talked a little bit earlier about content, looking at what content is driving a consumer action is really important to consider, and that's something that most brands have not historically done. They've sort of just said, well, this campaign worked. So, and then also layering on what you know about the consumer. It's that unified measurement concept to say, we saw this lift in general, but here's what drove that lift. Here's how we react to it, and be agile enough to say, this is what we need to fix, or this is what we need to repeat.
Love it. All right, last call. We're good? All right, I think we're good. That was fun. Thank you so much, Bruce. I really thoroughly enjoyed this hour. We actually had a lot of fun prepping for today.
Yeah, it was great.
Um, you have our contact info here on the slide. You can feel free to reach out to either of us, both of us. We obviously touched on a lot of topics today, which could warrant whole hour discussions.
Yeah.
So feel free to reach out. Bruce?
Yep. Thanks, everybody. It was a pleasure. Jackie, like you said, a lot of fun prepping for this. I think that the content is probably one of the most relevant topics of the day, but it's very, very loaded. There's a lot here. So if you're interested in hearing more about anything that we talked about, reach out. I see some questions that I'll respond to directly offline just to make sure you get the answer. Melinda, I'll get you more content on auto categorization. But thanks again, Jackie. It was a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. We appreciate the time.
Take care. Bye.